Imagine starting a company with almost nothing. No factory, no office, no investors. Just an idea and $50. It sounds impossible. But that's exactly how one of the biggest sports brands in the world began. This is the story of Nike. And the man who started it by selling shoes from the trunk of his car. Back in the early 1960s, a young man named Phil Knight had just graduated from college. He loved sports, especially running. But there was one problem. Running shoes at the time were expensive and often poorly designed. Most of the high-quality running shoes came from Germany. Brands like Adidas dominated the market. Phil Knight believed there was an opportunity. What if someone could sell high-quality running shoes at a lower price? That simple question would eventually lead to the creation of Nike. But at the time, it was only an idea. And Knight had no experience building a shoe company. After finishing business school, Phil Knight traveled to Japan. There, he discovered a small company that produced athletic shoes. The brand was called Onitsuka Tiger. The shoes were well designed, lightweight and affordable. Knight immediately saw potential. Even though he didn't actually have a company yet, he told the Japanese manufacturer that he represented a new American distributor. They agreed to give him the rights to sell their shoe in the United States. And just like that, Phil Knight had a product to sell. Back in America, Knight partnered with his former running coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was famous among athletes. He was always experimenting with new ideas to improve running performance. Together, the two men formed a small company called Blue Ribbon Sports. But they didn't have much money. They didn't have a real office. So they started selling shoes in the simplest way possible. Phil Knight would drive to track meets and running events. Then he would open the trunk of his car and sell shoes directly to athletes. It was a humble beginning. But the shoes were good. And runners began noticing the difference. Word slowly started spreading. As demand grew, the small business began expanding. But there were still many challenges. Sometimes shipments arrived late. Sometimes they didn't have enough inventory. And money was always tight. For several years, Phil Knight had to work another job as an accountant just to keep the business alive. But Bowerman continued improving the shoe designs. He believed running shoes should be lighter and more comfortable. One day, while experimenting in his kitchen, Bowerman poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron. The result was a new type of sole with better grip and flexibility. That strange experiment would eventually become one of Nike's most famous innovations. By the early 1970s, the partnership between Blue Ribbon Sports and the Japanese manufacturer began falling apart. Phil Knight realized something important. If the company wanted to grow, it needed its own brand. So in 1971, the company created a new name. Nike. The name came from the Greek goddess of victory. They also needed a logo. A young design student created a simple curved symbol. She was paid just $35 for the design. That logo later became one of the most recognizable symbols in the world. Today, we know it as the Nike swoosh. But creating a new brand was risky. Blue Ribbon Sports was still a small company. And now they had to compete against huge brands like Adidas. Everything depended on whether athletes would trust this new brand. Then something important happened. Nike began working with professional runners and athletes. When athletes started wearing Nike shoes in competitions, people noticed. The brand gained credibility. Sales started growing faster. And the company began expanding rapidly. Nike's real breakthrough came when it focused on something more than just shoes. It focused on inspiration. Nike advertisements didn't just sell products. They sold a feeling. The idea that anyone could become stronger, faster, and better. Eventually, Nike created one of the most famous slogans in history. Just do it. Those 3 words became a powerful message for athletes around the world. The slogan encouraged people to push their limits and take action. And it perfectly represented the spirit of the brand. During the 1980s and 1990s, Nike exploded in popularity. The company partnered with legendary athletes. One of the most famous partnerships was with basketball superstar Michael Jordan. The Air Jordan sneakers became a global sensation. People lined up outside stores just to buy them. The partnership changed both basketball culture and sneaker culture forever. Suddenly, Nike wasn't just selling sports equipment. It was shaping global fashion and culture. Over time, the company expanded into many sports. Running, basketball, football, training, lifestyle fashion. Nike became a global brand recognized in almost every country. Today, Nike generates tens of billions of dollars in revenue every year. Its products are worn by professional athletes and everyday people around the world. And the small company that started with $50 is now one of the most powerful brands in sports history. But perhaps the most interesting part of this story is how simple it began. Phil Knight didn't start with a massive factory. He didn't have huge investors. He started with a simple idea: better shoes, and the determination to keep going even when things were uncertain. For years, the company struggled. Money was tight. Success was not guaranteed. But persistence made the difference. The story of Nike reminds us of something important. Great companies don't always start with huge resources. Sometimes they start with a simple idea, a small opportunity, and someone willing to take a risk. Phil Knight once sold shoes from the trunk of his car. Today, the brand he built inspires millions of athletes around the world. And it all started with a single belief: that one idea could become something much bigger.